Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. If you're living in Iran or Israel or any of the regions that may be impacted by a full-scale regional war, maybe you're not having such a great day, but we'll have to wait and see how things evolve because we are living in a critical time with leaders who really do not value peace. There's no money in peace, as they say, at least not as much as there is in war. Well, joining me today to discuss everything that's going on from NATO escalation to escalation in the Middle East is David Swanson. He is an American anti-war activist, an author, and executive director of World Beyond War. He's known for his books and campaigns promoting peace in a world that is filled with war. So, Mr. Swanson, thank you so much for joining me today. How you doing?
It could be better, I guess, in terms of the state of the world. How are you?
I feel the same exact way. It's watching every minute, watching it unfold. It seems like we're really headed in the wrong direction. But what is your take on what is really unfolded over the past 24, 48 hours related to this potential full-scale regional war over Iran?
Yeah, it's good to see you. First of all, I think we maybe spoke at an event together at the Lincoln Memorial once where Trump tanks are going to come rumbling by pretty soon. I think the threat of a war on Iran is enormous. It is vastly more dangerous than numerous wars underway right now. I mean, the only one that rivals it for potential to escalate into global nuclear apocalypse is the war in Ukraine. And the war on Iran is possibly the stupidest of all the ideas for wars because it's been pushed on the U.S. public as desperately, urgently needed. We immediately must have a war on Iran or we're all going to die over and over again for decades and been stopped by public pressure, been stopped by Congress of all absurdities, been stopped by the spies and saboteurs in over a dozen so-called agencies that make up the so-called intelligence community that have said, and it's virtually the same lies trotted out again. Now it's Hegseth saying, well, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, but they could, in theory, someday have something that looks like a nuclear weapon. Like Hollywood studios have something that looks like a nuclear weapon, Mr. Hegseth. Like, why is this a reason to risk global war? Which, and even if it doesn't escalate to global war, it's incredibly destructive to the environment of the planet, to the economies of the planet, to relations across Western Asia. It's incredibly, incredibly dangerous.
I think the most dangerous part, and this is something that, I thought about before Trump got elected when he was running against Kamala, was that Kamala is so deeply unpopular that if she had eked out a victory in the election and tried to start a war against Iran, which of course is a bipartisan dream that they all have, a lot of people would have been opposed to it and there would have been a great deal of public pressure. But with Trump, he's the type of guy that can whip up support for any war. If he decided tomorrow that, we have to go full scale against Russia, I think he could whip up a good chunk of his base for that due to his popularity. And people view him for some reason as more trustworthy than other politicians. But if we do get entangled is such a bad word, but if we do launch this war on Iran, I mean, could you see a widespread portion of the American public getting on board with this?
I really doubt it. The polling right now shows the U.S. public dramatically against it, but propaganda can be very, very powerful, and the government still controls huge communications resources, and even with much of the so-called mainstream media in the United States being anti-Trump, they're anti-Trump except for war. They're, pseudo-progressive except for Palestine and so forth. So I think I think the one thing the U.S. public may resist is U.S. troops in Los Angeles. Even the governor of California. These U.S. troops should be destroying and killing somewhere else. That's their proper function, and I honor them for it, right? So you're going to have on Saturday the Democrats all holding rallies against a Trump military parade in Washington in almost every town across the United States except Washington, because they don't want to actually oppose a military parade. They want to love the military and the Army's birthday and the flag more than Trump and better than Trump. And so this is the Democratic opposition. Their autopsy on Kamala losing does not mention Gaza, does not mention that she could have said the words, "no more weapons to Israel," and be sitting in the White House on the throne right now. It's all about, their outreach and their strategy and their economic policy and their, criticisms and rhetoric. They just won't face up to the fact that people are looking for someone who's for peace. People were so desperate for someone who would be for peace that a lot of people tried to believe that was Trump.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Palestine. What do you think it says about the leadership in the United States that it's still so gung-ho for Israel and this genocide, whereas in Europe you have obviously a very deranged, sycophantic, pro-war crowd of leaders, but even when it comes to Gaza, they're saying enough. This is crazy. They started sanctioning Smotrich and Gavir. They canceled free trade negotiations with Israel. They are hosting now, two-state solution conference, which is not great. But, these are all things that are being done that we don't get anywhere near in the United States. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's very, very far from enough, right? My friends are sailing boats out of Europe from Malta and Sicily, and they're being attacked in European waters by Israeli drones, and Europe is fine with it. They're on a UK ship being boarded by Israeli troops, and they're fine with it. There are members of parliament in the UK now switching 180 and opposing the genocide, but supporting continuing to send the weapons. France is sending the weapons. Germany is sending the weapons. Like, as long as they're sending the weapons, the rhetoric does very little for me. I'm glad that there are more voices in European parliaments against war, but next week after next, they're all going to line up in The Hague, appropriately enough, near some cells that some of them belong in, and swear their allegiance to NATO and promise 5% of their economies, no matter how rich those economies get, to weapons. You have this unelected hack leader of NATO going around to each European capital and ordering the prime minister or the president to take money out of healthcare, out of retirement, out of all the good things that Europe has done better than the United States, and put it into weapons. That's not good for Palestine or anywhere else. Weapons get used. Weapons create wars. And so the notion that Europe is, generally for peace, I'm not seeing it. I mean, even Germany, given its history, the U.S. is pushing for hyper militarization, massive militarization, put everything into weapons and military preparedness. And if we blow up more of your pipelines, buy more of our expensive fuels. I mean, this is not yet the path to peace. Today, as we speak, there's going to be another vote in the UN General Assembly to pretend that they're trying to get around the U.S. veto in the Security Council on Palestine. But it's going to be a vote on another resolution that does nothing, that has nothing substantive in it, that doesn't remove Israel from the UN, doesn't sanction Israel, doesn't embargo weapons to Israel, doesn't put in place any motions to, and there's no notion in the UN or in big countries like US, Russia, China to use international law because they're all against it themselves. They're all against the ICC and the ICJ. The United States and Russia, the places where we are, ought to be the leaders in the world on these things. Instead, they're the leading holdouts and leading opponents of international law. And so I think more is desperately needed.
Going back to Iran, one thing that's been brought up, although I don't know how I feel about it, is some people are saying, well, this is all a big game. It's a threat. Israel can't do these deep strikes on Iranian nuclear sites without U.S. support. And the U.S. doesn't want that smoke. Trump didn't want it when he was in his first administration. He backed out, after he assassinated Soleimani, of course, in horrific fashion. But now we're seeing all the same pressures that are put on Iran each and every time that these negotiations begin to heat up and get close to an end. Now these pressures are heating up quite a bit on Iran. But do you think that it is possible that we could see the U.S. go full in and attack Iran, or do you think this is just a theater and threats with the aim of getting a negotiated settlement?
I think it's entirely possible, and I think it's outrageous that it's in the hands of a single individual, which the public of the United States, in theory, had some say over because they got to choose between him and some other ridiculously awful individual. These were the two choices, and you've put these imperial powers in the hands of that one person. And because you had the choice of making it some other absurdly awful person, it's supposed to be representative of the public will. This is outrageous. We should never be in this situation of having to speculate, based on who talks to Donald Trump that morning or what he has for breakfast. Yeah. Whether the people of Iran are bombed. And why are the people of Iran being sanctioned right now, impoverished right now, shut out from the world's banking system and corporations and sources of products and industry and materials? Because supposedly these sanctions are going to do the opposite of what sanctions have always done, right? Cuba, North Korea, they've been sanctioning these places for generations, supposedly for the illegal purpose of overthrowing the governments, right? And it always accomplishes the illegal purpose of collective punishment of the people and strengthens the governments. Iran would have a better government for its people and for peace in the world if Biden had not maintained Trump's Iran policies, if the pressure, as they call it, wasn't on, if Chuck Schumer didn't come out of his shell to demand that Trump be more belligerent toward Iran, right? Remember when Chuck Schumer went along with the budget bill for billionaires and everybody threw a fit and said, stand up to Trump? We didn't mean we wanted a new war. This was not what we wanted from Senator Schumer, right? We wanted legislation that didn't give all our money to oligarchs. We didn't want a way to give all our money to Lockheed Martin. This is not what people wanted from him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You brought up the point of it really depends on who speaks to Trump on any given morning, what his talking points will be, what his agenda will be. What do you think about people like Tulsi Gabbard, who has some horrible ideas on Gaza, but on Iran she's been pretty good. You have J.D. Vance, who's reportedly been outspoken within the Oval Office against war with Iran, and Donald Trump Jr. also, who's been opposed to the idea. The Jerusalem Post put out an article last week saying how worried they were about these three figures in the Trump administration with regard to impeding war plans over Iran. What sort of say do you think they might have, and do you think they have any influence whatsoever on this administration? Or do you think it's completely blackmailed and going to be cucked into starting a major war that's going to have devastating consequences?
I think it's very sad how limited influence the public as a whole has. And again, that we have to speculate on what's going to shape the mind of someone who clearly has very little idea what he's thinking himself. But I think there's definitely a chance that Tulsi Gabbard and J.D. Vance and the rest of these people, that whoever talks to Trump has some influence. If they can talk to him through Fox News, that seems to be the very best way. If it, face to face isn't really real for Donald Trump, right? But if he's looking at his television in his White House and somebody on Fox News, even if they're in the next room, is telling him through Fox News, that seems to be the way. But But these people who I disagree with on 500 other things, when I agree with them on Iran, you and I probably disagree on 500 things if we thought enough. But with people who agree with me on Iran, I want them talking to Donald Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that they can have some breakthrough. It's worked in the past, but it seems like we're at a different point right now. Hypothetically, if there is a war with Iran and it's a full scale thing and they go after the nuclear sites, do you think that Israel can come out of this? Obviously, they're not going to come out of this unscathed, but I mean alive. That's a serious risk for them at this point. It seems like Netanyahu's playing a dangerous game.
Yeah, well, when we start talking about nuclear sites, I think we should be clear that we mean nuclear energy sites, although that's deeply connected to nuclear weaponry. We haven't been shown any evidence of nuclear weaponry sites, just to be clear. But it's an incredible danger to the entire region, including Israel, including Palestine, and including all kinds of U.S. troops at U.S. bases. And when the proper kind of people start to die, when two or three of the people you're supposed to care about start to die. Look at all the news today is overwhelmingly about a plane crash where fewer people died than die every day in Gaza, and it will be the big story for the coming days. When that happens, that's the news. So it's not just that Israel will be immediately in a full-scale war with Iran, but the United States will too. And then there's a question of the other big powers in the world joining in. That's why it's just incredibly dangerous. And of course, Iran, as far as we know, doesn't have nuclear weapons, but Israel does. And the reason we've never been able to ban nuclear weapons from that region is because Israel has them. And of course, Pakistan and India have them. And this is just, why should we be playing with all life on Earth? We're slowly destroying it. What's our hurry? Why do we have to risk destroying it by next week?
That's a good point. It's really crazy to think about the point you just brought up, that more people die in Gaza every day than died on that very tragic plane crash today. But that just goes to show, think about how much media attention, not just for 24 hours, but for the full week that's going to get. And then Gaza is just no one covers it. It's crazy. Shifting gears to another conflict that you mentioned that has also a high probability, it already has taken over 1 million lives, and could take many, many more, Russia and Ukraine. What do you think is the holdup here? Because, again, Donald Trump has gone back and forth. The president has said that Zelensky is illegitimate one day. Then the next day he's saying that Putin is being too unkind to the legitimate leader of Ukraine. What do you think is the holdup with Trump, someone who said he wanted to end this so quickly?
Well, he wanted to end it, and he promised to have a plan to end it, and he was going to end it in one day prior to his inauguration, but he never showed us that plan, right? I mean, we're still waiting to see Nixon's secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. It was a campaign speech. It wasn't a plan. There was never any plan, right? And Trump doesn't have the capability of coming up with a plan because he doesn't look at the world in a complex enough way. If someone were to care about a lasting peace in Ukraine, or to care about the people who live in Ukraine, they would be looking at ways to give the people in the different regions of Ukraine, including the eastern regions and including Crimea, the right to vote on their own future with oversight by all interested parties. This has never been in the interest of the United States or Russia, both of which treat Ukraine as a piece in a puzzle and want to control it, or as much of it as possible. And so, Trump wants to do a deal with Putin where he gets a certain chunk of Ukraine and Putin gets a certain other chunk. This is unacceptable even to the lousy government in Kiev, which wants Ukraine for Ukraine. And so, I mean, and it's a very, very hard because everybody's had family members killed and everybody hates each other now. And populations have been moved in and out of these regions so that a vote now on what it should do would not be the same as a vote a couple years ago. It's very, very complicated, but you can have a plan like plans that have been near getting approved in recent months, where you put some of the bitterest decisions off for some months or years, and you get a ceasefire, and you get disarmament, and you get no NATO in Ukraine's future, and you get no Russian military in Ukraine, and you put some of the decisions about exactly what happens in each region off. But with nobody in the Ukrainian, Russian, or U.S. governments having the slightest interest in democracy other than as a campaign slogan, it's going to be hard to get to a lasting peace with some hope of people being content with it in every part of Ukraine. That's just, and it's so sad and it's so tragic because either the U.S. or Russia, for far less than it has spent on the war in Ukraine, could have made Ukraine a paradise and could have made itself the most beloved country to Ukraine by giving Ukraine everything it could possibly desire, not in bombs, but in clean energy and infrastructure and agriculture and trade. And it's just not in the cards. It's not, as you said at the start of this show, it's not where certain people make their money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Given that there's so many, and you mentioned this with regard to Iran, there's so many Americans that value peace, not just in Iran, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, so on and so forth, but with Russia and Ukraine and with even China over Taiwan. Why do you think it is? And maybe the question is a bit more simple for the Middle East because there's a very strong lobby in the United States. But why do you think it is that there are literally no Congress people who are actively having common sense and saying we need to have peace? Why is everyone so gung-ho for war with the largest powers on the face of the earth? Why do you think it is? This seems like when you look back in the history too, this is a very unique dilemma that we are facing in the country right now, where we have such high levels of homelessness, of health issues amongst our public, of infrastructure crumbling, and still no one is ringing the alarm bell.
and the Trump gang is rapidly trying to defund and dismantle what's left of all those good and useful things. I think there's probably not a time in U.S. history when you've had the political establishment or any significant fraction of it oppose multiple wars at the same time, right? They always have to, when they are willing to oppose any war, they have to strongly support all the other ones, right? So when someone like Obama was willing to pretend he was opposed to the war in Iraq, he had to be just gung-ho for the war in Afghanistan, of all absurdities, right? If there had never been a war in Iraq, Afghanistan wouldn't have become the good war. If there hadn't been a war in Vietnam, World War II wouldn't have become the good war. You have to have a good war to support, to establish your credibility as a mass murder enthusiast if you oppose some other war. And so with all the pressure to oppose the war on Gaza, and a chunk of Congress being moved to act as if it opposes the war on Gaza and takes some baby steps in that direction, it's even harder to get them to oppose the war in Ukraine. And the propaganda on that has been the strongest I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it's built on decades of demonization of Russia, the Soviet Union, Russia, but then Russia Gate from 2016 forward, and then the intense propaganda, so effective from the moment of the Russian invasion, the Russian escalation of this war that everyone thinks actually began in that instant. So powerful, so effective. I mean, showing the victims of war for once. I mean, only one side and only one particular war, but this is what ought to be done with all sides of all wars. We ought to see the victims because it's so powerful. But we went in a matter of days, maybe hours, from random people on the streets of the United States not knowing what Ukraine was, to stopping me, to grabbing me by the elbow, strangers asking me if I'm supporting the weapons to Ukraine. And peace has actually been redefined as support for the war by Ukraine, because war is something Russia does. Peace is because nobody knows what unarmed civilian defense is. They've never heard of it. They don't know what diplomacy or de-escalation or conflict resolution is. They've never heard of it. The only way you oppose a war is with a war, right? And so the Ukrainian war is actually peace. And so the democratic groups have peace rallies on one day against war in Gaza and on the next day for war in Ukraine. And they're both peace rallies. And that you go to the first one because you support it, they ask you if they'll see you tomorrow at the second one. So this is the understanding of what peace in Ukraine means in the US mind.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember in the early days, it was like, if you don't support what do they call it? The flight ban over Ukraine, then you're pro-war, without understanding what that actually means. That it would mean right. World War III almost immediately. God, we are in we are in a terrible situation. You were going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to add, you're not just pro-war, but you're probably paid by the Russian government. I mean, this is the common understanding.
Exactly. Well, David Swanson, we don't have much positive stuff to report here from today. I mean, I'm hoping for the best. I'm hoping for peace. I hope that your vision of the world wins out and we can have that peace. But it's a very, very, very delicate, dangerous time, and we're not led by people who are interested in peace. So thank you so much for coming on today and exhibiting what exactly we could have, but unfortunately we don't have, and I don't think we'll have anytime soon. So is there anywhere you'd like to shout out for people to follow along so they can get engaged on the ground and read more about you and your work moving forward?
Well, I'm at davidswanson.org, and I work for, among other groups, worldbeyondwar.org, and there are people going to Egypt to get into Gaza, people going on ships from Europe, people fasting outside the UN in New York, people resisting the invasion of Los Angeles, people acting for peace across Africa and South America. If you want to get involved in anything in any way, join us at World Beyond War.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.